As you can see, there is a huge debate over whether we are in a slowdown or not. I think there is a general acceptance now that we are in a slowdown. The question is, how deep is it? Is it structural? Is it cyclical?
No, but how can there be a debate? If 6 quarters of data suggest the economy has been slowing down quarter after quarter, how can there be a debate about whether we're in the midst of a slowdown or not?
I'm still waiting for the Prime Minister to say that.
No.
The day he says it, I will say, yes, we are in a slowdown. Till then,
but
it's a debate.
The data speaks for itself, and what we'll do is just walk across to the election intelligence dashboard and show you on the economic intelligence dashboard. The election intelligence dashboard comes up a few days later, show you what some of the key points to look at are. So let's take a look, and I'll start with the fiscal deficit. Now, this is something which will be very closely tracked in this budget. The fiscal deficit, largely under the finance minister and under the BJP government, has been under control. These are the Manmohan Singh years. You see the fiscal deficit target, the fiscal deficit numbers much higher. As you come down to 2019-20, 3.3 is what they thought it would be. Will we see a major slippage here? Let me get a quick word in from Santosh Mehrotra. Do you think that when we see the numbers at 11 a.m., the fiscal deficit targets would have slipped?
Almost certainly, if the government comes clean, because the Comptroller and Auditor General, the CAG, has already told us that it has not been 3.3, it's been 5.68. So it's all a matter of whether we come clean on the information or not. If we don't come clean, actually, we will not get very realistic estimates as we move forward.
Okay. So the other thing to look out for is inflation. We'll deal with consumer price inflation for a moment. Again, from the years under Manmohan Singh, when inflation was in double digits, it's been coming down, it's been relatively under control. But what we've seen, Rajiv Dubey, just over the past few months is that inflation, especially food inflation, jumping up. How much of a concern will that be when Nirmala Sitharaman and her team got set to make this year's budget?
So the moment you take out vegetable inflation out of the inflation numbers, you will see that inflation is very much within this range. And
that's the finance minister with her team, Anurag Thakur flanking her key bureaucrats from the finance ministry. She's wearing a lovely sparkling sari. That's the sparkle and the dazzle we need to see in her budget numbers as well. And she's got the Bahi Khata once more. So it's, usually Jetli and the others came with a leather briefcase of sorts. She's come with a traditional Bahi Khata.
So, Rahul, if you take out the vegetable numbers out of the inflation numbers, you will see that the inflation is somewhere in the 3.68% range, if I remember it correctly. It largely shot up because of onion, because of ginger, and because of potato. These were the three reasons why inflation was at 7.5%. This couple of months is it's likely to stay in that range, and after that the inflation is expected to be below the 7% range that we are seeing right now. So inflation is not really that big and that big a concern right now for the government.
Okay, from inflation, let's now come to tax GDP. One of the big reasons why demonetization was brought in was in the hope that this will see a massive change in the tax GDP ratio, that the amount of money we collect, the number of people we collect tax revenue from, would see a jump. Has that happened? To some extent it has, but is this less than what would have been anticipated, Mayor Sharma, when the government brought in demonetization? Because they would have expected a much sharper curve. Do you think that the expectation that was there, that tax collections would go up, more people would pay tax, they'd pay more tax, less evasion? To what extent has that materialized?
I think the real disappointment was the GST, rather than the outcome of demonetization. Demonetization, there were so many different justifications. I think we've forgotten, with hindsight, what it was actually about. The question was, why has GST led to this stagnation that we see in the years since then? There was the assumption that with GST, there would be an increase not just in indirect taxes, but also in direct tax collection as a consequence of the data that was collected. And it's quite clear now that at the root of many of the problems that we're seeing, particularly for government budget making, the issue is that the GST has underperformed.
Let me show those numbers to our viewers on the screen right now. Here are the GST numbers. I'll break this up on a monthly and on an annual basis. I'll start with monthly. Now, if you look at, so there are 3 years we are looking at. We are looking at 17, 18, 18, 19 and 19, 20. it's virtually the same. Just have that on the screen very clearly. It's a flat line curve. The government would like this to be an upward curve, ideally like a hockey stick, but far from that. Jagannathan, why do you think this is the case? This is supposed to be the biggest tax reform of all time, you know, tryst with midnight destiny, and now it's a flatline curve.
Actually, if you look at it, I would think the causality runs both ways. It is because the economy has been slowing down, your GST has been slowing down. It is not because the GST is bad, therefore the economy. So the causality runs from the slowdown. So the minute economy picks up, the GST, however, needs fixing. There is a problem with the structure, there is a problem with the technology, there is a problem with the compliance structure, and you still not, even today, you are not filed a proper GST return. You are doing GSTR 3B or some such thing. So there is a fundamental, then the rate structure is too complex. You need to also fix, especially, I think manufacturing did well, which is what we saw in the 17, 18 GDP numbers. But you had a problem with services. Services have never been taxed so much. In India, it's a service economy. And services are all in the 18% slab.
Yeah,
so
but
you have to
it's
fix
it's the small and micro industries who've been hit the most.
Yes,
in a
of
way.
course,
The
of course.
SMEs have been badly hit in the way GST was actually eventually implemented on the ground.
Yes.
And there is no sign. I know that the budget is not the place for Nirmala Sitharaman. She can't tinker with it.
Yeah.
It's got to go to the GST Council. But should she at least come clean today and say in the budget, look, we're going to overhaul GST. You need to send a signal to the SMEs, much more than the fat cats of Indian industry. You know, we'll have CII and we'll have all the men and women in their suits, but it's actually going to be the SMEs who actually need the real hand-holding at the moment.
I think, Rajeev, if she makes a statement like that, that will put a lot of confidence and pep back with the MSME.
Say that I'm going to overhaul GST.
Yes, I am very intent. I believe there is something wrong in the reporting. I believe there's something wrong in the structure. She should go, but I'll have to sit with the states and work it out. If the center shows that intention, it will be very good. If you look at the MSME crisis of the last 2-3 years, which is very, very bad, it was started by GST. And then the whole economy came down. The consumption came down. It's such a double whammy. They've got such fragile balance sheets. They've got such fragile income levels. They've not been able to react.
No, but can I counter that by saying that if everyone keeps saying tinker with the GST numbers, you can't have too much tinkering either. There has to be some stability and some predictability in your taxation structure. It can't be that each time the finance ministers get together, you start tinkering at the edges.
No, it should not be.
It's not about tinkering now, it's an overall.
It's and also for instance that you need to bring these slabs down. You know, you can't have 7 slabs in GST. It just has to be 3 at best. It has to be one rate of 16 or 17%. There has to be a merit rate and demerit rate. That was the intention behind GST. It's just that the political compulsions forced the government to bring these 6 or 7 slabs.
It finally boils down to the approach of the government. Whether it's a rent-seeking government, a profiteering government, or it's a do-good government. So this government has specialized in this, telling the industry, MSME or big ones, get your act together, but we'll take our sweet time to get our act together. So 2015 expenditure management, nothing has happened. Then they say that we put GST, you file returns, but we will give you refund whenever we feel like it. Then they say you supply power and we will pay back the generators whenever we like it. Power companies are owed by state and central distribution utilities 80,000 crores. So,
No, but on the issue of GST, is it not a fact that in virtually every country whose economy has been big or small, far less complex than India, for 3 to 4 years after the implementation of the GST, there's been a serious blowback.
So yes, there has been, but Rahul, I've been trying to look at this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. What I see from other experience, you have fewer slabs. You don't have these 7 slabs and you don't have the complicated manner in which you've got to do your filing. I think more people are, I don't think people are objecting to GST anymore. I think they're objecting to the manner in which it is being implemented on the ground.
And the tax department has gone into an overdrive and they are just going about so randomly picking
No, but there's
up
also so much evasion. 1 second.
No,
there's
there is
also
evasion,
chronic evasion.
But
That's
there's
a
also
reality.
tax terrorism, Rahul.
We don't know whether there's evasion, okay? Their government has yet
when you
put
go
out-
and buy things in the market,
no, studies have been done on
No study has been done.
anecdotally, one second. Anecdotally,
sorry,
when you
sorry.
go buy some
No,
furniture,
no, sorry,
the
Rahul.
whole business of being able to pay without tax still
No, no,
exists.
no, no.
What we've had,
There are
what we've had,
businesses that are running purely on cash
what
economy.
we've
Cash
had-
economy is
what we've had
back.
in the- we've
That's
just
a,
found-
that's
One
a
minute.
failure
nature
of the
of the-
government.
No, correct me if I'm
that's
correct
the
me if
nature
I'm
of the
wrong.
government.
Correct me if I'm
I
wrong.
mean, if
They
you
just
don't pay
found-
tax.
They just found a fraud running into thousands of crores involving GST. So it's not as if the frauds don't exist. That doesn't mean people are saying do away with GST, but you need a better GST. You need a more
You need a
convenient,
simpler
easy to
interface.
implement, accessible
No,
GST.
Rajiv, Rajiv, there's a 1 second, Vijay. There is an important thing here. If you think that the system is being gamed, put out a study, put out all the data. The GST has been around since 2017. You don't know which states are consuming less, more, producing less, more, where the frauds are more, where the frauds are less, which states are contributing taxes. There is no attempt to mine the data to produce analytics and put it in the public domain. So if you come out with a grand announcement saying, I know 70 companies are shell companies, we know 50,000 crores is being worth, put the data out.
How much of this, Santosh Mehrotra, is a reflection that we are also in a federal polity ostensibly, but where there is huge tension between states and the center? So you've got certain states like Bengal who are looking at any move being made by the center today with a sense of hostility, worried also, according to the Bengal finance minister, that the center is not even paying us what is due to us.
No, you're making a fair point. That's absolutely correct. But I would go back to the Shankar Iyer point about data. Who controls the data? It is controlled at the center. We need to begin to put this in the public domain. If we don't, people like me cannot mine it. If people like me cannot mine it, and I would like to see the government itself mine it. I don't know if the government is mining
But the
it.
hard data is that the targets are not being met. The
You are-
government's
you are
targets on
absolutely-
GST are
you're
clearly
right.
not being met.
But Rajdeep, I think what we need to understand is where are the problems, apart from the fact that the GDP is growing much more slowly and therefore collections are small. The fact of the matter is there is gaming going on, there is lack of compliance, there is fraud, there is a lot of cash economy stuff still going on. So what impact has GST had? Can we begin to understand what the GST data is telling us? I think Arvind Subramaniam had tried to use that GST data for very useful purposes, for looking at the formalization, etc. I want to see something of that being done. Unfortunately, this is not becoming public. And Shankar is absolutely right. We need to move in that
So I
direction.
think we need to
there is a
move
crying
beyond
need for
GST.
simplification.
We need to move beyond GST and take the tougher decisions. Tax agricultural income. Whatever, like we're talking about GST, which is only one aspect.
Shweta Punj, you
What?
will
No, no,
come
that's
back
not
here 20 years from now and say,
Yeah,
let's
that's
take
not
the tougher decision, we need to tax agriculture.
But
I
that's
mean, let's be very clear.
You know,
There are certain things you can't touch. There are holy cows, whether you've
But
got
Rajdeep,
400
I do
seats
hope-
or 200 seats.
I really hope that the government, at least you have to make take some concrete steps forward. You know, we can keep talking about implementation of GST, so on and so forth. But the fact is that only 6 or 7% of India's population pays taxes. You're talking about formalization of the economy in a country which is 80% informal. So, you've set yourself a very
taxes of 6 or
huge
7%,
target,
yeah, they all of us
which
pay indirect
you've
taxes.
not spelled out a game plan on how you plan to achieve that target. It's not going to happen. You have to look at other
So
ways.
what do I do for those small businesses at the bottom, whether formal or informal? Let's be clear, post demonetization GST, they are the ones who are hurting.
Yeah, I think
they are
they
the
need
ones who
a-
today need a budget that's going to give them a sense of confidence.
Exactly.
More than-
They're going to drive.
More than
Rajdeep, they're
income
also the
tax
ones
rebates.
who still continue in part to deal with cash.
That's okay.
So why
That's
why
okay.
so much
Let's not
compromise?
criticize
Why
it.
take away
That's
from
India.
that?
Why is cash
This
bad?
whole thing that somehow, let's be honest, in many ways they drive your economy more than the fat cats. You know, the
Absolutely.
fat cats will benefit in their own way. They will game the system if they have to. What does the guy who has no access
Rajdeep,
to...
the Prime Minister has been saying the economic survey says respect wealth creators. For the third time in the last 10 minutes, you're calling them fat
wait,
cats.
No, I'm calling them fat cats. No, I'm calling them fat cats because there's a difference. Because no one talks about the small guy. No one talks about the MSMEs who are the ones who are really hurting. This economy is
Why
gonna-
are they hurting?
But
And
wait,
they're going to be...
I want to take umbrage with Rahul's statement. Rahul, if the first chapter in the survey was wealth creation, second was about crony capitalism and business. And they had data to prove that these collected firms, as they call it, the monopolies, have done the nation a lot of harm. they've done the nation a lot of harm. And they have, taken more from the system. And it goes on to say, in fact, that if you hadn't spent that much on these so-called defaulters, the money would have been equal to the amount you spent on health and education, which would have been music to Sitaram Yechury's ears. I mean, a government document admitting that. So I think Rajdeep's point is, if there is any sector that needs crying attention, it is MSMEs, because that's where the job creation will take place, and that's where...
But it's actually the only ministry this time around that's managed to spend 80% of what was allocated to them, which is something that we can't say about across all departments.
This is now Mr. Gadkari, right?
Mr. Gadkari, yes. So he's really making an effort.
Who's been very quiet in Modi 2.0 for whatever reason. What is the reason? I was told by a bureaucrat recently that all the efforts that he was making in Modi 1.0 for, driving surface transport and road transport, there's been a pullback there. We aren't getting the kind of funds that we were getting in Modi 1.0. So there are lots of intra-ministerial concerns as well at the moment.
No, Rajdeep, I think you make a very good point. It's a ministry which needs a damn sight more attention than it has been currently getting in the last 5 years. Precisely for the reasons that you said, they are the ones who create the jobs. I think what I'm looking for, hopefully, in this budget is a certain increase in allocation for cluster development. Cluster development, you see, clusters account for most of the unorganized sector jobs, which are the MSME jobs. And there are 5,500 clusters of manufacturing and other products in this country. But the MSME ministry spends no more than 500 crores per annum. We have 5,500 clusters, Rajdeep. So therefore, if we increase the allocation, even if you double the allocation, it's a minuscule proportion of the government's budget. That could happen very easily without even touching the fiscal, and it'll help the MSMEs.
Just to clarify, Rahul, on the fat cat point, I think the fat cats got their break 4 months ago. With corporate, they've got what they, more perhaps than what they expected at the time. It's now time to look at other sectors that are really hurting and see what can you do to revive, in a sense, confidence. So I think that there needs to be a shift in priority.
The other thing we need to look at is trade. I'll show you the data for imports and exports both, and that's where we really need to see the government find a way of pushing exports. If you look at the curve which looks at total exports, this includes goods and services, it's again been a flatline curve. We cannot achieve the kind of growth that China does, and there's so many comparisons with China, till the time we're able to push exports up. In fact, not just is it a flatline curve, virtually like the GST curve, it's not even been growing fast, and that really is a problem. Now, part of this, P.N. Vijay, can be explained by the fact that there's an overall economic global slowdown, and therefore why alone blame India. But the part of the fact is that it's a big missed opportunity at a time when global supply chains are being reordered, so much investment moving out of China, it's going to countries like Vietnam. Despite the size of the Indian market, we're not being able to attract that investment.
Absolutely. You take the example of Bangladesh, they took away all the garment exports from us. You look at Vietnam, you can look at Vietnam's export performance last 2 years. Fantastic. Growing at 25-30%. Why is it we are not doing it? And that's where, the cost of logistics, the taxes that our exporters pay, nobody is paying attention to it. I mean, and we are just remaining a commodity exporter still. Why don't we get into labor-intensive electronic assembly, this, that, and the other? There is absolutely no policy. And
Jaggi, to what extent is it the government's fault? To what extent is it the fault of a larger global slowdown?
See, global slowdown is part of it, and a big part is the commodity bust. If you look at the previous export performance, as much as 20% of our exports were coming from POL exports, at one point. That's largely because you had regulated prices here, and Reliance and SR were exporting all the petroleum products outside. That was showing up as some kind of an export boom. Basically, they couldn't sell here. That is what is happening. Now that the petroleum prices come down, that is automatically brought down the total trade growth substantially. The other thing is we have a fundamentally uncompetitive economy. No matter how much we improve in the ease of doing business, but at the structural level, we do not have competitiveness, the kind of scales in manufacturing. We have scales only in some areas like services, which we are doing okay. But services exports are doing fairly okay, despite the slowdown there. It is in manufacturing that we are not succeeding. We are stuck at some level.
Here's a question India needs to ask. And till the time we have a strong answer to that question, we'll never be able to grow our exports, how many genuinely globally competitive manufacturing units do we have which can take on international benchmarks and compete with the best in the
Rahul,
world?
the other problem with exports, is wrong priorities. It is about, you know, the world wants electronics and auto components and cars from us, or automobiles from us, and we are trying to sell them leather. We're trying to sell them apparel. We've lost that race. We are nowhere in the apparel race. We're trying to sell them handicrafts. This is not the way to approach exports. You can't approach exports with the priorities of the domestic market. If your domestic market is, you're trying to say that I employ 14 million people in textiles, and so I want to export textiles. That's not what the world wants. That's not what the world wants.
That comes down to what the economic survey said yesterday. From Make in India, they were talking about assemble in India.
Yeah.
Let's try and look at a new model. Is there a new model out there? Or are we sort of saying, if the Chinese could do it, so can we? They're a very different structure.
Rajdeep, the foreign firms are going to come into the country only if we get our logistics right, our infrastructure right, and I don't think that's the way forward immediately. Yes, that's a medium-term objective. I think the short run, let's connect back to your MSME point with exports. The fact of the matter is that the unorganized sector, dominated by the MSME, account for about 40% of our exports. And they need packages. I would like to see in this budget a small package for leather, for footwear, for textiles. These are the sectors in which the Vietnamese and the Bangladeshis are beating us hollow. These are the labor-intensive exports.
One by one, yes.
Also, we're talking about assemble in India, we're talking about make in India, giving exports a push, yet we stay out of RCEP. We are placing curbs on imports.
That's exactly it. So that's the mixed signals. You're almost back in some goods to import substitution of the worst old days. So you have certain socialist old baggage that you carry with you into the 21st century, and at the same time you talk about pushing India ahead.
So there's a simple explanation for all of this.
Yes.
And that is the approach. Even 1991 to 2020, 30 years. And still the approach of government policies is as if they are in a seller's market, whereas the policies have to be that they should acknowledge that they are in a buyer's market. So if your services exports are growing, you make it easier for services, not tax them out of their pants at 18%. World over, nobody taxes services at 18%. It is the single largest engine of individual enterprise, home offices, all those things. Second, you make exports happen by allowing import of inputs. Every 3 months there is an amendment in the inputs. Third, you are saying now, for fertilizer we'll do like this, for this we'll do like. So your whole theory
But again, Shankar, it's coming back to vision. What is Modi-nomics all about? Is Modi-nomics about protectionism at one level? You talk about making what is Modi-nomics really about? Is it really wanting to open up the economy? Do you really want to be part of the global economy?
It is welfareism. It is welfareism.
You could argue it was welfareism in Modi 1.0. You wanted to win an election in 2018, 2019. Winning that Lok Sabha election was critical. Now it isn't. So I'm just wondering, Mihir, what is Modi-nomics all about?
Look, I think that it is basically pragmatic. It believes that something that works is something that we can implement, and that we can implement, that will be politically popular, is what we'll do. The problem here is that in the opinion of the people in charge at the moment, if you want to implement the kind of pro-growth, pro-export strategy we're talking about, their idea is, but then what happens to the jobs? We've lost all our manufacturing base. All we have to defend right now is the domestic Indian market. We have to profit from the domestic Indian market. So if you go and make these arguments, their pragmatic reply is, right now all we have going for us is our consumer base. We have to defend that at all costs.
Yeah, but now you also have a serious fiscal crisis. You don't even have the headroom now to announce these grand schemes that you did in 2018, 2019 to win an election.
So we'll build on some of that.
Grand at all. They take small
Sure, but either way, this government is going to have to tell us what are its priorities. I think somewhere...
I think Rajdeep, protectionism is definitely one of this government's priorities.
It is.
Because when the Prime Minister himself goes and says, only buy Indian till 2023, what does that mean?
No,
Basically means
said it
if you're
yesterday in
raising
his
import tariffs, No, it's been consistent.
Okay.
It's been consistent
So
about
we'll
the
take
fact.
a very quick break. We'll come back. We have lots of other points to look at. We'll see how Make in India is doing. We'll show you how employment numbers are doing. We'll show you how the Prime Minister's pet schemes are doing. So our coverage continues when we come back. On the other side of a very quick break, you're watching Modinomics 20.
Subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.